and we're now live on Facebook as well.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the live audience and those who will watch it, the recorded version. I'm Emil Brown, one of the vice chairs of the BAME network. My colleague, Tracy Cripps, who's another vice chair, and Erica Chazinga, who's the chair, obviously is part of the Black History Month events, and these are one of the events where we've set up to communicate across the trust. Before I introduce our speaker, who I've known, strangely enough, I met in the late 90s, actually. He might not remember this, yes, late 90s, 2000, 1999, 2000, when at the Home Office, when we first started Respect, and you came to support Respect.
I did.
So we have a lot of connection, and he's a lovely, lovely man, personality, always there to support and help and motivate, and that was something I picked up when we first met many yonks ago, as we're teenagers still. So I'll just give you a brief background of the speaker is Rob Neil, and Rob is a founding member of the MOJ's Ministry of Justice BAME Staff Network, which was set up in 2001, namely PROUD, which is slightly different from the Home Office at the time. Later in that same year, Rob became the first elected chair of the Civil Service Equality Network, known today as the CSRF, the Civil Service Race Forum. Rob commenced a career break from the civil service on the 1st of December 2020, and is now the director of the Crystal Alliance, where he leads a team of subject matter experts working across all sectors, supporting organizations and who want to be more inclusive. Rob's belief, and Rob believes, that increasing cultural intelligence can help individuals identify their biases and create effective strategies for managing them. Now, Rob is going to be talking about, today's talk will be about courageous conversations. Let's talk about race. Without further ado, here's Rob Neil, OBE. I'll add that to it.
Wow, catch. Emil, thank you so much. Can I just test? Can I be heard? Good on the voice. Great stuff. Thank you, Judith. And thanks for all your help, Judith, in setting this up and pressing all the buttons. Emil, I want to thank you, my dear friend, from all those years ago at the Home Office. We've stayed in touch spiritually, no doubt, and you've reconnected in the physical, and you've got me here. So thank you so much for that. I like to put those thank yous in nice and early, particularly for the individual who's made it possible and his team, perhaps, because if after we finished our time together, you think to yourself, well, that was a load of toffee, blame Emil, don't blame me, because I was just happily going about my business. In seriousness, I'm here to offer a presentation that I've pulled together with Emil's help, and indeed others that have been kind enough to share information with me, Monica amongst them. I hope Monica's with us. Thank you for all your help, Monica. And as Emil says, I'm going to talk for about a half hour, maybe a tad longer than that, but very much looking to invite your questions, your comments, your reflections. Please use the chat as we step through. There are some keen eyes on the chat who will take a lot of that in for us, maybe weaving it into some live questions after I finish the presentation. As Emil says, my name is Rob Neil, and I am a former civil servant. I let go of my beloved civil service on the 30th of September this year. And so I'm in my very first month out there in the big, good world, and no doubt bumping into other parts of it too. And I'm back with yourselves as not just public service workers, but as essential workers, doing all of the invaluable work that you do. And I want to squeeze in a thank you to each and every one of you for the work that you do out of and under the umbrella of NHS. Thank you. So let's move into my presentation and frame that presentation in the context of this month, Black History Month. It is, as some of you will know, the 34th Black History Month here in the UK, and the theme this year is Proud to Be. A Black History Month that began through this man, or at least this man and his friends, amongst them Linda Bellos, of course. But back in 1987, I was but 4 years into my career as a civil servant. Akiaba Ade Sebo, working at the Greater London Council, in a conversation that is reported to have been held with his daughter, who was expressing her surprise at the absence of anyone that looked like her in the teachings at school. And so Akiaba felt that it was an opportunity to put that right and to say to not just his daughter, but to anyone that African history in the British Archives is there. We can all come together to celebrate the lesser known facts, Britain's growing cultural diversity. Remember, this is back in 87, folks, raising everyone's awareness, acknowledging that in the continent, across the continent of Africa, October is a month of tolerance. It's a month of reconciliation, and indeed a month of harvest. And Black History Month is for everyone. And I know and I sense with an audience such as this one, we may be either side of that line. We may say to ourselves, well, Black history is not just a single month. Black history is not a history just for Black people. And wherever we sit on that line, and we legitimately sit where we sit, everyone can respect that opinion. I think Black History Month is an opportunity to celebrate those lesser known facts, to grab the opportunity and amplify the contribution of those from the continent of Africa and indeed the present day African diaspora. And that's what I put my energy into when it comes to the month of October here in the UK. So, Courageous Conversations. That's the title that I've given this presentation. And the subtitle is this: let's talk about race. Just talk. Let's just have a courageous conversation about it. And as we step into the conversation, as we step into that conversation, I'd like us to exercise our thought, our patience, our respect as we step through the conversation. And I begin to frame our conversation now. It was on the 25th of May last year, 2020, that George Floyd had his life stolen. The arresting officer, Chauvin, held his knee down into George's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. We've just endured 29 seconds in time. And for some of us, that was discomfort enough. And yet, with his final breath, George tried to inform the officer that he couldn't breathe. With his penultimate breath, George had cried out for his mother. And for those of us that could, we saw live one human being taking the life of another because he could. As if George was an animal. Bless his soul. That officer was to go on trial. That officer was found guilty on 3 counts. And that officer is now serving time in prison. Later on this year, the fellow officers that accompanied Chauvin also go on trial. for their part, for their role in what happened. And I opened my presentation with a sober thought about what took place then for a number of reasons. But mostly, it's about this. It's about Sankofa. It's about our ability to go back and fetch from the past the lessons that we can apply to the present and indeed the future. What is it that really took place on the 25th of May, 2020? What is it that then, like a tsunami, went across the entire world, impacting all of us, different ages, different genders, different ethnicities, to ask a deeper question? What is it that's happening in our communities, in our places of work, indeed in our homes, when it comes to the issue of race? Rising in prominence was Black Lives Matter. Just matter, not more than, not instead of, but just matter. Just matter. And yet that ruffled a few feathers, didn't it? You see, the advent of COVID-19, I don't need to go into that for this audience, but the murder of George Floyd, and indeed the lockdown that we are still wrestling with and still trying to ease out of, means that we are all in a storm, every single one of us, on this call, on many other calls. And yet we are in different boats. We only have to look at the published reports on COVID-19 to acknowledge that it is a virus that impacts on Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people at disproportionately higher rates. And why? Well, we know that this moment is so vitally important. There is a legal requirement under the Equality Act for workers such as ourselves, an act that extends to a public sector equality duty, not just to look at what could be done when it comes to equalities, not even what should be done anymore. We've moved on. The Equalities Act 2010 insists that we must have due regard to the elimination of discrimination. And you see, we can no longer afford to ignore the impact of discrimination. George Floyd's legacy has already seen to that, bless his soul. But you know, for some of the senior leaders I sit with, there is a reluctance to accept that George Floyd is in fact a UK issue too. We only have to think about some of what's happened here in the UK. What about Cynthia Jarrett in 1985, killed in her own home by attending officers with a mouth gag that's no longer used in such raids on homes because of her death? Or how about Joy Gardner in 1993, studying law, here visiting actually from the island of Jamaica, but studying right here in England to become a lawyer, attending officers, misread the information about the height, the alert on her raid, and she died on her way to hospital. Closer to home, we have Christopher Older, who died in hospital, died because of the treatment that was administered to him when he got into a fight with a fellow patient. Or how about in our prisons, Zahid Mubarak, who died the night before he was due for release at Feltham Youth Offending Institute, died at the hands of his cellmate who removed a leg from a table in that room, beat Zahid about the head until he could breathe no more. A cellmate who it was later discovered was a member of a far-right group. And most recently, some of you may have heard of the case of Dalian Atkinson, the former professional footballer, who became mentally unwell, threatened his father, threatened his brother, 2 attending officers, tasered Dalian 3 times. The male officer kicked Dalian in the head twice, killing him. That officer is now in prison too, guilty of manslaughter. The first in 31 years who has now been found guilty in the course of his duties. You see, moments don't just happen. And this is not a moment. This right now is a movement. James Baldwin perhaps said it best. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. James Baldwin, he of Giovanni's Room, he of If Beale Street Could Talk, he of I Am Not Your Negro. James Baldwin, the African-American civil rights campaigner. Who's this? Anyone want to pop off mute and tell me who this is? Who's this? Go on, Emil, I know you know. Who's this? Have a guess. Quick bit of interaction. Pop it in the chat if you don't want to come off mute. Well done, Monica. It is indeed Rosa Parks. Let's have a slightly tougher question. Who's this? Slightly tougher, right? It's good. The quality of image is not as good, I accept. But can you make out who this is? On the screen, I'm showing two pictures. And on the left, Monica has already given us the correct answer on the left. It's Rosa Parks, she of the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama in the 1950s, 54 through 55. But to the right, has anyone got who that is? Who's that on the right? Have I got a couple of guesses? Someone says Muhammad Ali. Not the first time that's been guessed. I can see where you're going with that, Tracy. I can see where you're going, Monica. There's not a passing resemblance there. But in fact, his name is Paul Stevenson. 9 years after Rosa Parks bus boycott, Paul Stevenson, right here in the UK, specifically in Bristol, led a bus boycott. And that bus boycott was indeed to lead to the amendments to the 1965 and indeed 1968 Race Relations Act, extending those employment rights, not just from service, but to the place of work too. Paul Stevenson, check him out when you get some time. You see, moments don't just happen. And so we have those courageous conversations. We're here already talking about race. And I look forward to your questions, your comments, your reflections by the time I park it. But I want to know now how comfortable each of you are talking about race. Put it in the chat. Give yourself a score from 1 to 5. Let's have a look at the kind of collective levels of comfort that we as a group today have talking about race. 1, you're not comfortable at all. You're extremely uncomfortable. That's 1. 5, you're always comfortable. You're always ready, prepared, indeed willing to talk about race. Give yourself a 5. And on that scale, what they call Likert, but that scale from 1 to 5, give yourself a score. Just whack it in the chat. Let's see what sort of figures we've got for the audience that we've got today. Give yourself a score. Thank you, Monica. Cheers, Joan. Emil scoring 4. Excellent. Vanessa's got a 4 too. Excellent. 3 from Erica. Thank you, Erica. Cheers, Tracy. Pop your score in there in the chat. And whilst we take those scores in, I'm going to move on, but I want us all to acknowledge what we're scoring. 4, 5. This is great. Good stuff. Because you see, in the last 10 years, 12, when we go from the oldest I'm showing you on screen right now, we've had a library of considerations, of reviews, of reports. Some of you will be familiar with some of this work, whether it's Ruby McGregor's Race in the Workplace or David Lammy's review of the criminal justice system. What about the wonderful Sandra Kerr at Business in the Community, and indeed Wendy Williams's work, and Windrush, the lessons learned review. Some of you will be all too familiar with the Windrush situation. Right back from the very beginning when we had the Stephen Lawrence report conducted by the late Lord William Macpherson. All of these reviews looking at the condition, the circumstance under which Black people live and lead their lives. A total of 375 recommendations in those reports, 375. And yes, because of my work, I have read each and every one of them. I have worked with others who have read each and every one of them. And together we have created something called the Race Code. We may talk about that later, but just check out the racecode.org. And if anyone here has any multitasking skills, wants to look up the Race Code, www.theracecode.org, and slip that into the chat so that everyone can have a look at it, I'd be much appreciative. But you see, now is the time for action. Now is the time for action. That's what we've arrived at with all of what's happened in what has been a tumultuous 2020. And so we get another report, don't we? We get this report, the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. What a report that was. 9 months in gestation, 258 pages. And you've guessed it, Emil. I can see from the smile on your face, Rob's ready to let off on this one because he's no longer a serving civil servant. I'm very conscious, of course, that I'm being recorded. And I do want to say that I love the civil service. I continue to love the civil service, my beloved civil service that I worked at and in for 38 years. Indeed, 18 days after I left, my daughter joined. My daughter is now with the Crown Prosecution Service. She's a lawyer. She's prosecuting and no longer defending, and she's starting out on her career as a civil servant. But I have to ask the question, if after 9 months and 258 pages, you cannot find evidence of institutional racism, where were you looking? And I would ask this question of any of the commissioners that you now see on the screen. I happen to know some of them. I happen to have worked with Tony. And you know, something about my time with Tony doesn't surprise me that he couldn't find institutional racism. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. You see, when we're considering racism, we have to look at the dimensions of racism, the internalized racism. You see, I think Werner Myers says it best. Werner Myers is the head of inclusion at Netflix. And Werner Myers says, we were all outside when the contamination came down. And so we are all impacted by racism. We carry it with us. Oh, some of us manage it better than others, but we are all impacted by racism. It's those subtle and overt messages that reinforce the negative beliefs of self-hatred in individuals. You see, it's the internalized that leads to the interpersonal, the outward signs, the racist acts and microaggressions. You know those microaggressions, those daily insults, those daily slights. You know, the assumption that if you are from the Black community, that you can't possibly be the leader, you can't possibly be in charge. You know the ones I'm talking about. You know the ones that say, well, Rob, where are you from? Paddington. No, where are you really from, Rob? I'm really from Paddington. Hello? You know the ones I mean. Leading to institutional and then on to structural. There is a relationship in these 4 dimensions, a relationships that proved elusive for the commissioners of the CRED, the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. Where were they looking? Because you see, wherever you look, there is evidence of a society that exhibits racism. Messages for us all to take in, where people can no longer put up with the racism that they face. You see, institutional racism is the collective failure of an organization to provide an appropriate or professional service to people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes, and behavior that amount to discrimination through prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness, and racist stereotyping, which disadvantage minority ethnic people. Pretty solid definition we've got there. And they're not my words. Of course, I get them from the Lawrence report, the report into Stephen Lawrence's bungled investigation and murder. Just yesterday, his mother, Doreen, celebrated her birthday. And yet she continues to campaign for justice, knowing that the 6 names of the perpetrators were given to the police, but for the first 72 hours, the police looked the other way. Why? Because they believed the only white eyewitness to the crime, a black man, but where there was a knife and fatality involved, that it must be him that was responsible for that act. And their eyes were taken off the 6 perpetrators that many now acknowledge were responsible. In fact, 2 of them currently in prison. But it's not just resulting in death. We know this, as tragic as that is, and where our attention must be, of course, where we're talking about the impact of death. But have a look at what happens in organizations. The stark reality brought out in this piece of research shows that the opportunity cycle through the lens of race and ethnicity is different for different people. Remember, we're all in a storm, but we're in different boats. You see, for our white friends and our white colleagues, they're able to build strong rapport with teams because of their similarities. They have a higher profile of opportunities, higher visibility. They impress senior leaders. They're seen as capable of delivery. They're given career advancing opportunities, higher performance ratings. This builds a track record. You're seen as future potential, better sponsors around networks, focused support and senior advocacy, more likely to be promoted. I don't need to tell many of you this, but it's worth reminding us that for our minority ethnic colleagues, for Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, you're less likely to find similarities to build rapport. You get lower profile work, the limited visibility, of course. You're less likely to build a strong network, notwithstanding the performance of some powerful networks, incredibly powerful networks, but you have to work harder. You're given fewer opportunities. Average performance ratings, average. You no longer maintain a strong track record of performance. You're overlooked. You're less likely to be promoted, harder to visualize a career path. You're more likely to leave an organization than stay and flourish. This is a sad reality. Oh, it's tough for some to hear on either side of that ethnic divide. It's tough to hear, but it's a reality. And why? Because there are so many ways in which stereotypes are perpetrated. Just look at the frequently uttered words when you Google search these words. Black, you get poor, violent, religious, lazy, cheerful, and dangerous. For white, you get wealthy, progressive, conventional, stubborn, successful, educated. Well, let's look at the gender divide. For female, you get distant, warm, gentle, passive. For male, you get dominant, leader, logical, strong. These are the frequently uttered words. They make their way into recruitment campaigns. They make their way into decision-making platforms. They make their way into recruitment interviews. It's baked into the system. I love what Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has to say about some of that stereotyping. I love what she says in her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. If you've not watched that, please check it out. Jot it down and check out that TED Talk after this. You see, she says the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue. Indeed, many of them are. But it's that they are incomplete. You see, the single story make out that it's the only story. And for many of us, we know that isn't true. Gordon Allport gave us his theory on his scale of prejudice as way back in 1954. He says it starts at level 1, anti-elocution, verbal abuse, using derogatory language. This is on the ground floor. This is at level 1. If left unchecked, it turns into level 2. The avoidance, people withdrawing. That's why you get cliques and gangs and separation, and you get people sitting in certain parts of the canteen. You know the one. Then you get the discrimination. Well, in fact, if I'm going to separate myself, I'm going to start showing favor to certain people only. And in Gordon's work, he's talking about what then ensues is a physical attack. And that physical attack can, of course, lead to death. That's the seriousness of it. And some people might be saying, well, Rob, that's not work, is it? No, that's not work, perhaps. But this is. At level 1, postures and gestures of failure to challenge, just letting it go, the kind of bystanding, colluding behavior. At level 2, you get the gaslighting and the microaggressions, the inertia around tackling concerns raised, the deficit model approach. You know the type, when there's a leadership program for an underrepresented group, but that leadership program is written, designed to fix participants. Oh, let's give this group some confidence so they can get on in the organization. I've worked with many Black groups. I've worked with many Black staff networks. Emil knows that. We've worked on some together. I'm yet to meet the Black person who's lacking the confidence. It's not the lack of confidence. It's the lack of opportunity. Talent is everywhere. Opportunity is not. Then we get to level 3, the discrimination. This is the outward signs of everything. Happens all the time, and way, way too often. Have a listen to this short video from Alexandra Wilson.
Next tonight, October is Black History Month and has become a great opportunity to celebrate the outstanding contribution that Black Britons have made in the UK. It's also a chance to look at how things are starting to change for the better, but sadly, sometimes far too slowly. For our series, Making History, Chloe Keeley spoke to Alexandra Wilson, a young Black barrister who's trying to change perceptions as she fights for justice. On my way into work every morning, on the way to court, I think about not only the huge responsibility that I've been given and being trusted to represent people, but also I think one of the things that really drives me is the fact that I am starting to see change in the profession. And it really excites me to think that, in the next kind of 10 to 20 years, we might see a much more diverse bar.
Alexandra Wilson was called to the bar in 2018. Her dream job has been both what she hoped for and what she dreaded.
I came to the bar thinking it was going to be an elite institution that wasn't very diverse. And unfortunately, it is still like that. It's getting better at the really, really junior end, and we're starting to be more representative of society. But the problem is that we're not keeping those diverse people in our industry.
But Alex tells me it's not just the numbers that need to change, it's attitudes.
The best way to kickstart that is by actually having anti-racist training led by people who understand what systemic, racism is. I remember a very senior barrister approaching me in one of the robing rooms and telling me that he felt that in diversity being encouraged in the judiciary, that was, compromising quality. In one day, I was mistaken for a defendant by professionals 3 times in one day. And for me, it's a symptom of a much bigger issue that Black people in the UK are still being over-criminalised.
Earlier this year, Alex set up an organisation called Black Women in Law.
So that provides, a support network, but also provides networking opportunities and mentoring for younger Black women so that they don't have to go through some of the stuff that we've been through.
Do you see this as a moment of change?
I do. I think that now the world is listening. It's not just about whether or not people use racial slurs or actively discriminate. We need to recognise that there's a systemic bias and we need to start actively tackling that. It shouldn't just fall on Black people or just on minority groups. I think everyone needs to step forward and be committed to actually seeing change, and then things will happen at a better pace.
Thank you for watching and listening to that. That may have sparked some questions. Let's see if we can get to those with after these final few slides from me. Courageous conversations. Let's talk about race. The wonderful David Williams, many of you will be familiar with David's work. He's the professor of public health at Harvard University, and he conducted a study that illustrated and highlighted the high exposure that there is through racism to multiple stressors, the accelerated aging, the early onset of disease, all of these outcomes from the impact and effect of racism. And if you haven't familiarized yourself with Dr. And Professor David Williams's work, please do check out his TED Talk, Racism Makes Us Ill. It's available on TED Talks. You can check that out as well. And thank you to whoever it is that's operating the CUH Teams option there, because you've kindly put on Chimamanda's talk already. Thank you for that. Well, look at these. Again, I don't need to labor the point with this audience, but here's a wonderfully informed infographic that looks at ethnic health inequalities in the UK. Just that one at the top. Black women are 4 times more likely than white to die in pregnancy. A huge program earlier this year on Channel 4 around that was broadcast for us all to see. But there's a raft of other disparities listed here. Where were they looking? The Commission for Race and Ethnic Disparities. Where were they looking? Did they just miss this? Were they just looking the other way? We turn to your own res report, kindly shared with me earlier, and I'm conscious that we're inside the organization here and now, but thank you for sharing those as published. And, you know, some of the overall figures for your representation of stats. I mean, this tells a story right here, doesn't it, in terms of representation? But, you know, if you look deeper at some of the responses on the staff survey, let's have a close look at that and some of the changes, and some good news in here too, with movement. With the green figures. I did a lot of work around our own staff engagement survey at the Ministry of Justice, so I instantly understand some of these figures. And if we had more time, we could unpack some of this. But I wanted to show this just to remind ourselves that on nearly every indicator, even where there's been improvement, the improvement has not been as great for what's titled the BME, the Black Minority Ethnic People Group. There's room for improvement. We've got to do better at this stuff. It is a privilege to educate yourself about racism instead of experiencing it. That is a privilege right there, right there. And so we can absolutely ask ourselves this question. Where do you stand? Are you a colluder? Are you someone that just goes along with it because it's easier than doing anything else? Maybe you're a bystander. You're uncomfortable, but the best thing for you to do is just look the other way. I'll just not get involved because I'm not sure what to say or do. Or maybe you're an upstander. Maybe you're, like a lot of us these days, learning how to step into situations and remind people of their responsibility, and to actually do better when it comes to tackling those isms in the place of work. Maybe that's you. You see, being an anti-racist requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, and regular self-examination. So says Ibram X. Kendi in his fantastic book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. If you've not read that, please check that out. It's a fantastic book, and you can access a lot of what he's saying in this book through his now regularly published and uploaded podcasts. You see, ultimately, on this journey in becoming anti-racist, we're all moving through these zones: the fear zone, the learning zone, and the growth zone. The fear zone is where a lot of people find themselves trapped, avoiding hard questions, striving to be comfortable, talking to others who look and think like them, denying that racism is a problem. We saw a wonderful example of this on some brilliant TV just last week with Ashley Banjo interviewing Jim Davidson. And Jim Davidson, who could take it no more, the funny guy, you know, the comedian, he could take it no more. And Ashley just stayed calm. He just put the questions calmly to Jim Davidson. And Jim Davidson decided that the seat was too hot for him. He had to leave. He was so flustered that he went out the wrong door and couldn't get out the building, and Ashley had to point him in the right direction. But you see, some people are trapped over here in the twilight zone. They don't even get to the fear zone. Oh, I didn't know about any of this before George Floyd. Oh, you know, I'm a champion of diversity, Rob. Oh, Rob, I've got my second cousin twice removed is Black. Did you not know? I feel so guilty. I don't know what to do now. Well, we've got to do something, you know, as Edmund Burke, the Irishman, said back in the 19th century, all that's needed for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. All that's needed for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Now, if you look up the quote, you'll find that Edmund actually said, all that's needed for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. But he was a product of his time. He was back in the 19th century. He meant good people. He didn't just mean men. He meant good people. So I asked the question, which zone are you in? Where would you like to be? Why are you in that zone? And who supports your journey? Who's helping you to educate yourself about race and structural racism? Are you helping yourself? It's all at our fingertips now, you know. We can watch TED Talks, listen to webinars, listen to podcasts, buy the books. We can do that if we really want to. It's right there. And educating our peers on how racism harms our profession. Yielding positions of power to those otherwise marginalized. We can all do a bit of that. And so as allies, we can absolutely acknowledge the benefits of diversity. And as I round up now and invite your questions with at least 15 minutes of that, I look forward to those. We can acknowledge the benefits of diversity. They are numerous. Increased creativity, increased profit, value for money, higher employee engagement. What is an active ally? Well, an active ally is moving from sympathy for to empathy with. Empathy with those who experience discrimination. An active ally is moving from passive belief in to active delivery of. From tacit support to demonstrable action. From owning your mistakes, which is a good thing, to proactive education. The Dalai Lama said it best. It's not enough to be compassionate. You must act. You see, allyship is not a spectator sport. It's not about the badge or the lanyard. It's doing. Don't tell me you love me. Show me you love me. 10 ways to get active. Don't wait for a formal program. Dive in. People need help now. Don't perform. This isn't an award ceremony. It's not about the bling. It's about helping people to sing and soar. That's what it's about. Listen. Oh, and when you think you've listened enough, listen again and hear what's being said. Listening and hearing are not the same thing. They work together, but they're not the same thing. You have to hear what's being said. How many organizations are now listening to their Black staff because of George Floyd? But how many of them are hearing what their Black staff are saying? Not the same thing. Speak up and speak out, but never speak over. Believe people's experiences. You know how many times I've heard senior leaders actually question whether what they're hearing is true or not? That, my friend, is gaslighting. When people have the courage to draw up their trauma, believe them. Apply zero tolerance across the organization. Sponsor someone from a minority ethnic group. Understand your privilege. White privilege does not mean that you haven't worked hard. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve what you have. White privilege simply means that your hardship is not because of the color of your skin. We're all working hard. Some of us have to work harder. Feel the fear and do it anyway. I love Susan Jeffers' book, where she targets her fellow sisters, but she's actually speaking to all of us. Feel the fear and do it anyway. And finally, do the work. This ain't going to just drop into your lap. You're going to have to work hard at it. Active allyship is hard work. So think about what you're going to do. Maybe something you've heard in this short presentation. You're going to stop doing one thing. You're going to start doing one thing. And maybe, just maybe, you've come along to this event. Emil has kindly asked me to join you for this presentation. And you've thought to yourself, well, what's Rob going to have to say there? He's not told me anything that I ain't doing already. Brilliant. Carry on doing it. You now know it's like an affirmation that what you do supports inclusion in your workplace. Please carry on doing it. Finally, know you. Study your personal history, examine your values, appreciate your passions, keep asking why. Why do we need to be doing this? Why do we need to do this better? Nurture your self-awareness. Remain curious. Now that you know you. Be true to you. Took me decades to work this one out. I was trying to be something else. And the day I realized that, hang on a minute, I'm trying to please all these people all the time. I'm just going to be me from now on. Check your own behavior for sure. Empower yourself and others. Share your difference and stand in your power. And finally, remember, we're all human beings. Eat well, rest well, regulate your time on social media. You know the ones, those weapons of mass distraction. Be careful, they'll steal too much of your time. You know what I'm saying? And check your company, Spend time with those that edify and leave you feeling more capable, not less. Prioritize your well-being. Courageous conversations. Let's talk about race. Thank you for listening to me. I invite your questions and ask that we remember, if we simply skip around taboo subjects, we're only ever playing it safe. If we fail to confront the elephant in the room, it will only make for uncomfortable debate. What we have to do in having those courageous conversations is get to the heart of the matter, get under the skin of bias. Here is some recommended reading. And at that slide, I invite your questions and any comments and reflections. Emil, back to you, my brother.
Thank you, Rob. What can I say? Very powerful. It reminds me of the days we were working for these changes to happen in the civil service. So we've moved forward immensely. And thank you again for such a powerful presentation. And obviously that enables us as a trust to take things forward and reflect on a lot of the work we're doing and be much more progressive in doing a lot of changes within the trust as we're trying to do at this present stage. There are a few questions in the chat. We've got Abigail Peck. She's just said, yes, this was amazing. Thank you so much, Rob. And I feel I've learned a huge amount, but still need to do more as an active ally.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you.
Monica says, thank you, Rob. Fantastic.
Thank you, Monica. Any questions? Yep, I think
Erica's got a question for you.
Hi, Erica.
Hello. Sorry, I haven't got my my hand up button here. That's why I was waving frantically there. Thank you so much, Rob, for giving us the the honor to come and have a chat or have a talk at our organization, and Emil for hunting you down. Yeah, he did a wonderful job. So my question is, here we are in Black History Month in October,
yeah,
and we have laser focused a lot of our efforts in raising awareness about Black issues and issues about racism and things like that.
Yeah.
From your experience with other organizations, how do you see them, or what has been your experience of them keeping the momentum going after October?
Sure.
Because I don't want myself, Emil, and Tracy to then go back to business as usual. Yes, we've got good support from the comms department, the ADI department, but how do we then keep the momentum going, considering the limited resources within the organization and things like that? How do you, what are your nuggets of advice on how we can keep the momentum going and live and breathe race, race awareness?
Sure. Great question. Great question, Erica. And it's one that I think needs to be asked and responded to on a regular basis. There's no, some questions you can ask, answer them, and it's done. And you move forward and upwards after that. But the question about how we can keep it on the radar, how we can keep it current, how we can keep it at the fore of our minds is implicit actually in the question, is that it needs to be something that's done constantly. And I offer these two bits of advice, whether they're nuggets or not, may depend on how your organization picks them up, Erica. Firstly, I have always campaigned for resourcing staff networks. When I say resourcing, I don't just mean money. I mean, yes, an amount of money, but it actually doesn't have to be that much in comparison to the overall budget of the organization, I've found. But it is about affording those that run staff networks the time to do that work. Too often, the people running networks are doing it off the edge of their desk. They're doing it in their own time. They're parking their day job and then doing network activity, or they're working shifts that are outside of their day job. I say, make the work of the network part of your job. Be assessed on it, be reviewed on it, have a KPI around it. It's part of the job because it's helping the organization to be better. So especially now, and remember I said staff networks, I don't just mean Black staff networks, I mean all staff networks.
Yeah.
So that's number one. I asked senior leaders who are making decisions about how the limited resources, and I accept they're limited. I'm not, I've been around long enough to know that there isn't, a bottomless, supply of resources, but we can do better at affording those that are running networks enough time to do it. That's number one. Number two, connect with other networks. It's so straightforward to find out what's happening at other trusts, what's happening beyond the health sector, what's happening in other territories. Every year, some of you will know Sharon in Kotaria, who wrote...
Absolutely.
Good. And she wrote this book, The Incredible Power of Staff Networks. And in this book, she demonstrates how to run a network effectively, a representative staff network. And every year, on the second Wednesday in May, there is a national day for staff networks. Some of you will know that. And on that day, networks across sectors, all networks come together to celebrate their existence. Next year, it's going to be on the 11th of May. We've already started planning the day. We've already had our first meeting. And what I say to you that are on networks, you, Erica, you, Emil, you, Tracy, anyone else that's involved in running the networks, you know how it works. You end up doing 20% of the people do 80% of the work. We know how it goes. So well done you for keeping it going. But let's continue to win active people who will help the network and start putting some ideas in line to support the National Day. I know it's only the one day, but it's so much happens outside of the day as well, which is where your question came from, Erica. So The Incredible Power of Staff Networks, Sharon in Kotaria, MBE, the 11th of May next year. Let's do something to kind of connect with other networks. And remember, resourcing your network. It doesn't have to be money. It can be an amount of time that gets measured and assessed, part of your appraisal, but sits alongside your other roles. You've got a portfolio of work now. And that way, we can give the rightful prominence to our staff networks. They are the secret sauce. Networks, especially now, as people are in and out of lockdown, mental well-being, mental health, so important that we have our networks that can be a point of contact, a place to turn to where we can earth our emotion and be heard in order to then offer our best to the organization. Great question, Erica. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so. Thank you.
Thank you. Got a couple of messages, and Tracy would like to ask you a question too. Just quickly, Kate Greenwood says, agree, lots of my reading list now too. So she's got a lot to read on. Vanessa Anderson, thank you, Rob. It's been a helpful webinar. I'm so sorry I need to run another meeting, but we'll be making it read some time of the books you've recommended. Monica's got a question. Monica's question is, was the key to enable the BME staff network for established to thrive?
Well, I think that's a great question, Monica. Thanks for that. There are a number of things that were done in order to shift gears and take the network to a higher level. We extended invitations across the wider organization and said to all staff, Black and white staff, that this is a network that we want to hear from everyone. So that we extended the invitation. We created open doors. There wasn't hoops and hurdles for people to jump through and over. We made membership straightforward and simple. We also did our work on the network. We looked at what it was that we wanted to effect. We honed in on what we wanted to effect. We chose, I mean, you could easily spend your whole existence trying to do everything, but you're not going to be able to do that. Identify 3 or 4 key things that you want to do, under promise and over deliver. Under promise and over deliver, and cut your cloth accordingly. By all means, if you're in a conversation with the top of the organization, you can give them the full list as to what's possible if it's resource, but you then tell them, with the resource we've got, this is the amount we're going to do, and we're going to do it to the best quality possible, but we're going to do it by honing in on it. So be realistic in what it is you can do. Don't shoot for the moon when that's not attainable. Really, really hone in on what it is you can do. And then I'm going to repeat something I said to Erica's question, actually, Monica. I'm going to say, connect with other networks in other organizations. Just connect with them. You'll be amazed at how much stuff is shareable at nil cost, at these days with all the communication techniques we've got. Of course, we need to be sensitive with some of the information. You know, we can't just share everything. Some stuff is sensitive, and we've all signed up to, whether it be the Nolan principles or secret information, sensitive information. So we need to be smart about that. It's not just about sharing everything without any kind of check on it, but we know what to do. We know what can be shared. We know that sensitive stuff can be removed or anonymized. So whether it's a constitution, the latest data, techniques, interviewing skills, workshops where there's some places available and people can, the amount of times we've been able to get people onto training opportunities without there being an invoice generated, all that kind of stuff. Wonderful opportunities just by connecting with other networks to share stuff that's available. That's what I would say.
Tracy's, do you want to take your mute off?
Thanks, Emil and Rob. Amazing presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I think we're over time. I think we're at the hour, so I'll be really quick. But it'd just be interesting to get your insight on these 2 points.
Yeah.
So the earlier slides in your presentation, you were speaking about, obviously, people of BAME background and origin having a lower amount of opportunities. So I just wanted to tease your mind, actually, as to if you could give 3 top tips in terms of how we can tip the scales of opportunity in our favor. What you would suggest.
Okay.
And then secondly, Rob, what I was really, really interested in asking you is again in the earlier part of your presentation, you spoke about the report and that they found no evidence of institutional racism.
Yeah.
And I just wondered what your take was in terms of, not necessarily do we need to redress that report, because every single person on this call knows that that's absolutely nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But just in terms of, you know, from the impact that the report had at the levels it had in Parliament,
Mm-hmm.
is there a call to redress some of that?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
just to get your views on that, really.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Tracy. Two great questions. I know we're out of time. So at speed, well, you know, when it comes to this that you mentioned, and about the fact that there is a reality that for many of our white friends and indeed white colleagues in the workplace, that they are experiencing an advantage that they get simply by not being from a minority ethnic status. I think there are things we can do to try and level the playing field by acknowledging that we need to put our, and by our, I mean minority ethnic staff, Black staff, we need to sometimes put ourselves in the way of those opportunities, is to gain strength from membership of any network, is to appreciate that there are clever ways that we can ensure the work that we do is attributed, that my name is on it, that you know, whether it be my social media presence, whether it be my opportunity to present at the senior level or higher level than at which I sit, whether it be about joining certain networks and beyond my own sort of intrinsic demographic, but joining networks about the profession, you know, whether it be project management or estate management or whatever it is that my anchor, my professional anchor may be. So there's ways of adding some stardust, some sparkle to our CVs that we can set about doing in order to mitigate the kind of institutional bias that is at play. Sometimes we can find ourselves a reverse mentor, someone who's higher up the organization traditionally, that can help us navigate the labyrinth and show us how we can make our way around the organization more efficiently. We can seek to put ourselves in those positions to accelerate our appreciation of how we make our way around the organization. There's no shame in that. There's no harm in doing that, to accelerate, as I say, our appreciation of the organization. With regards to the CRED report, Tracy, my personal view, I do want to say that my personal view is that I'm not going to spend any more time. I've read it. I've been a part of a group that submitted 4 submissions as we were invited to do, having read it. And I'm not going to be doing any more. Why? Because I've got some other things I need to be doing. I need to be getting on with developing cultural intelligence as a learning opportunity, and therefore looking at people's drive, looking at their knowledge and their strategy and their planning when it comes to cultural intelligence, and to ensure that they have an increased capability to work across different cultural contexts. That's where I think a part of the best thing I can do is. That's not to say, Tracy, that there aren't some people who are well-versed and good at breaking down inappropriate or inaccurate reports. Good luck to them. I mean that in the healthiest way possible. And if I can help them in any way, then I will. But I'm not personally going to be spending time on it. It's a report that's flawed, in my view. It's a report that has failed to see the obvious. And I, having read it, can make that comment. There is some stuff in there that's useful in terms of action. They can be promoted. There's some very useful action points in there. But the overall premise that institutional racism is no longer impacting negatively on Black people is not my experience, and it's not the experience of many Black people that I work with and support. And so therefore, I think the general premise in this report is flawed and in error. And I think that there are reasons why it came out that way personally. I want to concentrate my energy on doing the stuff I can affect, the stuff that I can change positively. And by working with others, that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you, Rob. Just a message from Joan Malney. She says, Rob, this has been great. My own reflection is that we have so many initiatives and we're doing what the best and the rest are doing. My sense is that we need to change the conversation so we get to the heart of the matter and work on the causes. And how do we change the conversation?
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, someone has already popped, I think it's Monica has already highlighted that you've got some wonderful offering coming up on cultural intelligence on the 15th and 17th of March. Do get onto that if you can. I don't want to set the hairs racing now by saying something that there isn't enough room for anybody. So my apologies if I've done that. But certainly one of the leading providers across the UK right now is a company called Above Difference. Jennifer Ezekiel is rolling out cultural intelligence training. She's a phenomenal individual. She's got an incredible team, and they are reaching parts that oh, brilliant. That's great to hear, Joan, working with Jennifer. Well, you're on the right track. This is music to my ears. Jennifer is, as I say, the leading supplier right now. You've got the Institute for Cultural Intelligence, who now has Ritika Wadia working there. Ritika and Jennifer are working together as well. I'm going to be with Ritika tomorrow. She's bringing David Livermore over from the States. So it's on its way. Cultural intelligence is on its way. Get ahead of that curve. Look it up yourself. Read up on it yourself. Get onto the course if you can. It's a fantastic approach, looking at ways in which we can work more effectively across cultural differences and contexts, and looking at our drive, our knowledge, our strategy, and our planning. And it's right there alongside IQ and EQ, intelligence quotient and emotional intelligence. Right now, alongside that, not instead of, is cultural intelligence, CQ. Get involved.
Thank you, Rob. What can I say? It's been, wow, great. And thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
It's, my reflection is more of we're on the right path as a trust. We invest in a lot of energy and time, and obviously bring in various individuals and bodies to help us along the way. More importantly is actually getting that accountability and change actively from conversation to actually seeing it happen on the ground. So it's changing mindset and culture and actually letting that thing happen as opposed to talk about it.
Yeah.
So that's where we are, and thank you so much.
And can I say, Emil, I've probably spoken far too long. I do want to snatch the microphone and say thank you to everyone on the call. Thank you for the work you do in our beloved NHS. It really is, it's beyond essential. I could talk to you about family members and dear loved ones that have benefited from the wonderful NHS that we have. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for having me. I pray that it's landed in a good place. God bless you all. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay well.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming, and we end our presentation. Have a good day and stay well. Thank you. God bless.
God bless. Cheers, Emil.
See
Catch
you.
you soon. Catch you soon, Emil.
See you.